welcome to the deep dive.
Mhm.
Ever wonder why kids between, say, 6 and 12 do the things they do? Suddenly shooting up in height or navigating those tricky friendship dynamics.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. We've got some really interesting material here today, basically looking deep into how they develop physically, cognitively, and socially during middle childhood.
Right. And our mission really is to unpack all this information, the growing bodies, the thinking, the social stuff, and pull out maybe the surprising bits,
Right.
the things that make you think.
Exactly. And more importantly, what does it all mean for anyone who, knows or works with kids in this age range? It's pretty vibrant.
It really is quite a journey they're on. We'll look at growth spurts and maybe when they don't happen as expected, coordination, health things that pop up. Then we'll kind of switch gears to brain power, how their logical thinking starts taking off, memory, language, reading, all that foundational stuff.
And then the social world, making friends, figuring out who they are, right and wrong, and how family and school really shape them. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. So starting with the physical side, it's a time of really noticeable changes, but maybe with some unexpected twists.
Definitely. Here's one that often gets people. This is actually the only time in life when, on average, girls tend to be taller than boys.
Really? Taller?
Yeah. And get this, even kids the exact same age can have height differences of 6 or 7 inches, totally normal. And both boys and girls are usually gaining about 5 to 7 pounds a year.
Wow, girls being taller. That's not what you picture. It shows everyone's on their own schedule, I guess.
Right. And our sources also point out how, environment matters. Most kids in North America get enough food for their height potential, but sadly, that's not true everywhere. Undernutrition can really hold kids back.
What's interesting, though, is that within the U.S., the sources say genetics are mostly driving height and weight differences.
True, genetics are the primary driver here, but culture, that still really influences what kids eat. And it's worth remembering, even stress can have a physical impact. It might affect the pituitary gland, which controls growth.
And the sources mention artificial growth hormones, too.
They do. They can be effective, but, there's not a ton of long-term safety data, so it's something that needs careful consideration.
Yeah, definitely complex. Okay, let's talk food. Nutrition. It's not just about size, is it?
Not at all. The sources link good nutrition to a whole bunch of other benefits, things like kids being more involved with friends, feeling happier, less anxious.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and also more curious, eager to explore. They stick with tasks longer, they're more alert. Plus, it boosts confidence and, really importantly, helps their cognitive performance. It fuels their whole development, not just their bodies.
So interesting. Studies even show well-nourished kids show more social initiative, like starting conversations.
Exactly. They're more likely to initiate play, invite others in. It's quite significant.
Okay, but on the flip side, we have to talk about childhood obesity. It's a big concern.
It is. The sources define it using BMI body mass index, that height-to-weight ratio doctors use at or above the 95th percentile for their age and sex.
And it's complex, but the data shows it's more common in lower-income families, and there are links to race.
Right. And a really worrying statistic is that kids who are obese are much more likely to be overweight as adults. There are lots of reasons connecting back. Genes play a role. For sure.
But also parenting styles.
Sometimes, yeah. Parents trying to control eating too much might accidentally lead to the child having less internal control later. And then, of course, poor diets and not enough exercise are major factors. There's a figure showing fewer kids are getting enough daily activity.
That's a worrying trend.
Yeah.
The USDA's My Plate is mentioned as a guide, but getting kids moving feels just as vital.
Totally. And the sources wisely say, make exercise fun, part of their routine, not, a chore or punishment.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Motor development, how they move. Big improvements here, right? Both big movements and small ones.
Huge improvements. Gross motor skills, running, jumping, that stuff kids master a lot. There used to be this idea that boys were just naturally better. But the research suggests when you look at boys and girls doing similar activities, those differences mostly vanish. Societal expectations seem to play a big part.
That's a really important point. There's a THAS showing the range of skills, skipping, throwing accurately. It's quite a leap.
And then fine motor skills, so key for school.
Like writing.
Exactly. And tying shoes, buttoning shirts, that's around 6 or 7. By 8, they use each hand more independently. By 11 or 12, they're almost adult-like in manipulating objects.
Wow. And that's linked to brain development.
Yeah, specifically to increased myelin, think of it like insulation around nerve fibers in the brain between 6 and 8. It helps signals travel faster, making those fine motor skills smoother.
Amazing connection. Okay, what about general health during these years?
Well, the good news is, thanks to immunizations, really serious illnesses are less common. Kids still get colds and stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But the sources note about a quarter of U.S. kids have some kind of chronic long-term condition.
And asthma comes up as a big one.
Yes, over 5 million kids in the U.S. And what's concerning is the higher risk for racial and ethnic minorities, often linked to poverty and environmental factors like pollution. There's a figure showing higher rates, especially among Black children.
Why the increase overall, though?
Researchers aren't totally sure.
Yeah.
Could be pollution, better diagnosis, maybe more exposure to triggers. Lots of possibilities.
Another big health issue. Accidents.
Yeah, injury rates actually go up between 5 and 14, mainly because they're just more mobile, more active.
And sadly, car accidents are the biggest cause of accidental death for this age group.
It really underscores why safety measures, car seats, boosters, helmets are just so critical.
Absolutely. And what about online safety? That's huge now.
It is. The sources say parental supervision is still the best safeguard, really, and talking to kids, teaching them safe practices. We don't have perfect stats on all the dangers, but awareness is key.
And mental health.
Also really important, estimates suggest about 1 in 6 children has a disorder like depression or anxiety each year.
And the symptoms can look different in kids, right? So they might get missed.
Exactly, which makes diagnosis harder. And there's still controversy around using antidepressants in kids. Plus, sadly, these issues did increase during the pandemic.
Raises big questions about access to care and awareness. Okay, let's turn to kids with special needs. Sensory issues first.
Right. Sources cover vision problems from partial sightedness to legal blindness, though most severe issues are caught early. And hearing impairment, which can affect different sound ranges.
And the impact depends on when it starts.
Very much so. Early, severe hearing loss can affect abstract thinking and sometimes speech development. Then there are speech impairments, like stuttering, which vary a lot in severity and can impact communication and self-esteem.
And learning disabilities. The sources mention specific learning disorders.
Yeah, difficulties in specific areas, listening, speaking, reading, like dyslexia.
Where words get jumbled.
Sort of. It's more about decoding the sounds and letters. Then dysgraphia is trouble with writing, dyscalculia with math. They also mention auditory processing disorder, trouble making sense of sounds, and nonverbal learning disabilities.
Lots of specific challenges.
Yeah.
And ADHD?
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Key signs are inattention, impulsiveness, low frustration tolerance, maybe hyperactivity, no single test for it.
And boys get diagnosed more often.
They tend to, yeah. And overall, diagnoses are increasing. The causes aren't totally clear, maybe linked to delays in how the brain's cortex develops. There's a figure showing some differences. And treatment, especially medication, remains controversial.
Okay, quite a range of physical and health considerations. Let's shift to cognitive development, how kids think. Piaget's ideas come first, the concrete operational stage.
Right, for kids roughly 7 to 12, the big shift is they start using logic actively and appropriately, but mainly for concrete problems, things they can see and touch.
So that classic example of understanding that the amount of water stays the same even if you pour it into a different shaped glass? Conservation.
Exactly, that's conservation. They grasp that. They can also think about more than one aspect of something at a time, decentering, and understand that actions can be reversed. Big steps in logic, but still tied to the real world.
How do Piaget's ideas hold up now? What's the verdict?
Well, he's definitely had a massive impact on education. Huge. But criticisms. Maybe underestimating kids' abilities sometimes, partly due to his early methods. He might have been a bit off on the exact ages skills emerge, and maybe didn't account enough for cultural differences. There's a figure showing how training helped Aboriginal kids grasp conservation, suggesting learning plays a bigger role than he thought.
So context and experience matter more than maybe he realized.
Seems that way. Modern research shows kids can often think more logically earlier, especially with familiar stuff.
Okay, moving beyond Piaget. The information processing view. Like, kids' brains are upgrading.
Kind of, yeah. This approach looks at how they take in info, encoding, store it, and retrieve it. Memory, basically. Working memory capacity gets a big boost in middle childhood. They can hold and work with more information short term.
And they get better at understanding their own memory, meta-memory.
Exactly. They start figuring out how their own memory works, like, I'm better at remembering faces than names, or I need to write things down. They become more strategic.
Which leads to control strategies and mnemonics. What are those?
Control strategies are conscious tactics to think better. Mnemonics are specific tricks to organize information, like using keywords, repeating things, rehearsal, grouping items, or making mental pictures. Practical tools, really.
Stuff adults use, too.
Yeah.
Okay, what about Vygotsky? He emphasized the social side of learning, right?
Absolutely. His key idea is the zone of proximal development, the ZPD. Kids learn best doing things just slightly beyond their current ability, with help from someone more skilled.
Like training wheels on a bike.
Good analogy. And his ideas lead to things like cooperative learning kids working together and reciprocal teaching, where students lead discussions using summarizing, questioning, etc. It highlights learning together.
Makes sense. Kids learn tons from each other. Okay, language development. It feels like they really take off here.
They do. Vocabulary explodes, grammar gets way better, they understand sentence structure more deeply, still might trip over some sounds, but their pragmatic skills using language appropriately in social situations really improve.
Knowing how to talk to different people.
Exactly. And adjusting for context.
And that metalinguistic awareness comes up again. Understanding language itself.
Yeah, it's a huge development. They start understanding language has rules, that words are made of sounds, usually around 5 or 6. By 7 or 8, they even get that if someone misunderstands them, maybe they weren't clear enough. It's key for communication and learning new languages.
They're becoming language detectives. The sources also mention using language for self-control.
Yeah.
And bilingualism.
Right. Kids use more self-talk, that internal voice, to guide behavior, and it gets more effective as their language improves. For bilingualism, speaking more than one language, well, there are different school approaches teaching in the native language while learning English, or full English immersion.
And those approaches can be kind of controversial politically.
They can be, but the research is pretty clear. Knowing more than one language has real cognitive pluses. Bilingual kids often show better language awareness, learn new words easier, are more flexible thinkers.
Better memory, too.
Even better memory, yeah. And enhanced executive functions like mental traffic control for focus and multitasking, even on non-language tasks. The sources really highlight these advantages. And a figure shows the amazing diversity of languages in the U.S.
Fantastic. Okay, reading, a huge part of school. There are stages to learning, right?
Yes, the sources outline stages. Stage 0 is prerequisites before school, like knowing letters. Stage 1 is phonological recoding, sounding out words. Stage 2 is reading more fluently. Stage 3 is really reading to learn. And Stage 4 involves understanding multiple perspectives.
And the big debate. Phonics versus whole language.
Right. Code-based approaches focus on sounds and skills. Whole language emphasizes exposure to complete texts. Research tends to support code-based phonics methods as being more effective for most kids. And interestingly, learning to read actually changes the brain.
You can see the impact neurologically.
Yeah, figures show changes associated with reading acquisition. It's pretty cool.
Okay, beyond the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, what else is happening in schools now?
There's more focus on individual accountability for students and teachers. Also, more attention to student diversity and inclusion. Though the sources note the pandemic caused learning setbacks, especially for minority and disadvantaged students, which is a major challenge now.
And multicultural education comes up, helping kids navigate different cultures.
Right. The goal is helping kids become competent in the majority culture while also keeping a positive connection to their own background group identities. This touches on that tension between cultural assimilation, everyone becoming one unified culture, versus a pluralistic view where diverse cultures coexist equally.
So the ideal is often helping kids develop a bicultural identity, feeling comfortable in both.
That's often the goal, yes. How best to achieve it, immersion versus bicultural approaches, is still debated.
Okay, intelligence. A huge topic. How do the sources define it?
It's tricky, but generally, the capacity to understand the world, think rationally, use resources effectively when facing challenges.
You're measuring it. IQ test.
Historically, yes. Binet's early work led to concepts like mental age and the IQ formula. Today's tests, like the Stanford-Binet SB5, the Wechsler scale, WISCV, the Kaufman KBC2, use more sophisticated scoring deviation IQs. The WISCV, for example, looks at verbal skills and performance skills.
But IQ isn't the only way to think about intelligence.
Definitely not. There are other theories. Some talk about a general G factor. Others distinguish fluid intelligence, problem solving, from crystallized intelligence, knowledge. Gardner proposed multiple intelligences, musical, kinesthetic, etc.
Right, like being body smart or music smart.
Exactly. Vygotsky focused on dynamic assessment, what a child can do with help. Sternberg's triarchic theory looks at analytical, creative, and practical intelligence. So, many ways to conceptualize it beyond a single score.
And the really tricky issue of group differences in IQ scores.
Very complex and sensitive. Test takers' experiences, cultural background, these can influence scores. There's a long-standing debate. Do differences reflect actual ability differences or test bias? The whole nature versus nurture argument.
The bell curve controversy is mentioned too.
Yes, Herrnstein and Murray argued for a hereditary basis for racial differences, but that's been widely challenged by research emphasizing environmental factors and cultural bias in tests. The consensus now is that IQ results from a complex interplay of genetics and environment. It's not one or the other.
Okay. And educating kids outside the typical IQ range. Special needs and giftedness.
Laws like IDEA mandate education in the least restrictive environment, often meaning mainstreaming kids with disabilities into regular classes. Full inclusion is more debated. Intellectual disability involves limits in intellectual function and adaptive behavior, causes very familial, fetal alcohol syndrome, Down syndrome. It's classified by severity.
And gifted kids.
High performance in intellectual, creative, artistic, or leadership areas. Research suggests they're often well-adjusted, actually, but giftedness doesn't automatically mean school success. Education approaches include acceleration, letting them move ahead, or enrichment, studying topics more deeply at their grade level. Acceleration seems quite effective.
Wow, okay. That covers the physical and cognitive side really thoroughly. Let's shift now to social and personality development, Erikson's stage. Industry versus inferiority.
Yes, roughly ages 6 to 12. Kids are focused on competence mastering skills, whether it's school, sports, hobbies. Success leads to feeling capable, industrious. Difficulties can lead to feelings of failure, inferiority, maybe withdrawal.
And how they see themselves changes too. Less physical, more psychological.
Exactly. They start describing themselves using internal traits. I'm friendly, I'm good at math, I worry sometimes. Their self-concept gets more complex, divided into academic and personal spheres, and they really start doing social comparison.
Comparing themselves to others.
Yeah, evaluating themselves by looking at peers, especially similar ones. It's how they gauge their own abilities and opinions. They might compare upwards to someone better or downwards to someone less skilled. Both affect how they feel about themselves.
Which leads right into self-esteem, their overall feeling about themselves.
Right. Self-esteem develops a lot now, fueled by that social comparison, developing their own standards, and seeing themselves as having different strengths and weaknesses. It's generally pretty high, but can take a dip around age 12, often tied to the middle school transition.
And low self-esteem can become a cycle.
It can, but supportive, authoritative parenting can really help break that.
What about race and self-esteem? The sources say it's complex.
Yeah, older ideas that minority kids automatically had lower self-esteem due to prejudice haven't really held up. Social identity theory suggests it's more about whether the group feels they can challenge negative views. Interestingly, immigrant kids often have good self-esteem and do well academically, maybe feeling less popular but often highly motivated.
Okay, moral development. Right and wrong. Kohlberg stages come up again.
Yes, he used moral dilemmas to gauge development. 3 levels. Pre-conventional, rewards punishments, conventional, social rules norms, and post-conventional, universal ethical principles. Each level has 2 stages.
But his theory has critiques.
It does. It predicts moral reasoning better than actual behavior. Critics also say it's culturally biased towards Western thinking, and maybe reflects male development more than female.
Which leads to Gilligan's perspective.
Right. Carol Gilligan suggested boys often focus on justice and fairness, while girls might emphasize responsibility, compassion, avoiding harm. She proposed different stages for females focused on care, orientation to self, then goodness as self-sacrifice, then a morality of nonviolence or universal care.
Different lenses on morality. Okay. Relationships. Friendships change a lot now. Selman's stages.
Yeah, he described stages. Stage 1, maybe 4 to 7 years, is friendship based on who you play with, shared activities, not deep qualities.
Fun for now.
Pretty much. Stage 2, around 8-10, shifts to trust and personal qualities. Friends are people you can count on.
Okay.
Stage 3, 11 to 15, becomes about intimacy, loyalty, sharing secrets, mutual disclosure. Mutual trust is really central then. There's a table showing what kids this age like: helpfulness, loyalty, and dislike bossiness, not keeping promises.
Shows how much deeper friendship gets, and popularity becomes a big thing.
Huge. Status hierarchies emerge. Higher status often means more access to things, bigger social circles. Popular kids are often helpful, cooperative, funny, good at understanding emotions, good social skills.
But for some boys, being cool and tough can also mean popularity, even with negative behavior.
Sometimes, yeah, it's complicated. Social problem-solving skills are key, too. Dodge's model shows how kids process social situations. Popular kids are usually better at interpreting cues and finding good solutions. Less popular kids might feel helpless.
Can you teach these skills?
Yes, programs can help. Encouraging interaction, teaching listening, conversation skills, understanding nonverbal cues, it can make a difference.
There's the dark side. Bullying.
Sadly, yes. Verbal, physical, relational, excluding people, and cyberbullying. Victims are often kids seen as different, maybe loners. Bullies often come from difficult home situations, exposed to violence, maybe lack remorse.
And cyberbullying is particularly nasty.
It is, because it can spread so widely. The hurtful stuff can be viewed repeatedly. It has serious mental health impacts. Reducing bullying needs school-wide efforts, student involvement, empowering victims, and teaching kids coping strategies. Don't engage, speak up, get help.
Really important. What about gender and friendships? Boys and girls mostly stick to their own groups.
Very much so. Sex segregation is really strong. When they do interact border work, it often highlights gender differences, sometimes has romantic undertones.
And the friendships themselves look different.
Often, yes. Boys tend towards larger networks, clear dominance hierarchies, focus on status. Play might be more about rules, language reflects status. Girls often have one or two intense best friends. Equal status is important. Conflict resolution is often through compromise, maybe less direct confrontation in language.
Interesting differences. What about cross-race friendships?
They tend to decline in number and depth as kids get older. Most close friendships are within the same race. Race can become a bit taboo, but positive contact between groups does help reduce prejudice.
Okay, finally, the big influences. Family and school. Family life looks so different now for many kids.
It does. More working parents, divorce, single-parent families. Kids gain independence. Parents and kids share control, more co-regulation. But parents are still hugely influential. Siblings offer support and conflict. Only children, generally well-adjusted.
What about kids whose parents both work?
If the family is stable and well-adjusted, those kids generally fare well. Self-care kids, latchkey kids concerns existed, but it can also build autonomy. Divorce can be tough initially, often linked to conflict before the divorce, but long-term consequences are often minimal if things settle down.
And single-parent families.
Blended families.
Single-parent outcomes depend a lot on economics and prior circumstances. Multi-generational families are increasing, offer richness and potential conflict, common in Black families. Blended families have role ambiguity challenges, but younger kids often adjust well. Same-sex parents. Kids develop similarly to those with heterosexual parents. Research is clear on that.
Race and poverty also impact family life. Yes, strong family ties often noted in Black and Hispanic families, collectivism in Asian American families. Poverty creates huge stress, fewer resources, disruptions, less responsive parenting, risks for kids. Group homes exist for kids who can't be with parents, but there's debate about their effectiveness versus family care.
And schools' impact on social-emotional growth. Attributions.
How kids explain success or failure, is it me, internal, or the situation external? This really affects future effort. There are cultural differences here, too. Black children may be less likely to attribute success internally. Girls sometimes attribute failure to lack of ability. Success externally, the imposter syndrome idea. Asian cultures often emphasize effort more.
And emotional intelligence. Should schools teach it?
That's debated. It's about understanding and managing emotions. Some argue, yes, it's crucial. Others feel it's more the family's role.
Wow. Okay, that was an incredibly thorough deep dive into middle childhood. We covered so much ground.
We really did. From those growth patterns to thinking skills to the complexities of their social worlds and personalities, it's such a dynamic period.
Yeah, the interconnectedness is striking. For me, some surprising things were definitely that girls being taller phase, how subtly culture impacts growth, and maybe the newer understanding of race and self-esteem. It's not as simple as we thought.
Absolutely. And the stages of friendship really map out that maturing social understanding. The cognitive pluses of bilingualism, too, that's always fascinating.
For me, the aha moments were really seeing how physical health links to learning, how social stuff shapes their identity, and how culture is woven through everything.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Thinking about all these developmental steps and influences, what are the biggest shifts you see in the kids you know around this age? And maybe, how can understanding these processes help us create environments where they can really thrive?
Definitely something to ponder. We encourage you to think more about the areas that sparked your interest today. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.